So I wanted to explain why I find this album, The Roaring Silence by Manfred Mann's Earth Band, very interesting. I decided to investigate this album because ever since moving back to Virginia Beach, the phone that I keep all of my music on has been frequently dead, so I've been listening to a lot of the radio. And one of the stations that I have programmed in is a station that plays just lots of boomer rock or older rock and roll and also newer stuff, but it's like a variety channel, and they play Blinded by the Light a lot. And I had never really heard the song growing up. My parents didn't listen to these radio stations. I was not that familiar with it. I knew it best because the chorus appears in AMV Hell 3 very briefly. So that's the main reason I've heard this chorus before. Hearing the song on the radio, I realized it's like a 7-minute prog epic, but it's not like proggy in the way that Rush is, where it's extremely technical. It's more that it's got a very straightforward, just bombastically huge chorus, where it sounds like he's saying revved up like a doucher in the middle of the night. That was the first thing that caught my attention. I had to look up the lyrics to see if he was saying revved up like a doucher. What he's saying is revved up like a deuce. A deuce. Because this song, I had assumed had been from the 80s because of the prominence of keyboards and, like, you know, the just the sheer drama of those keyboards. It's a very 80s feeling kind of sound. But this song is from 1976. So when you think of it in that context, it feels a little bit ahead of its time. And when you listen to it with the full version, because it's, you know, truncated a bit on the radio, and even the radio version, I mean, if you're paying attention beyond the chorus, there are parts where it just has some very odd ideas, some really interesting soundscapes, and really immaculate production. And when you hear the parts where, like, Chopsticks starts playing through the background of a track, and it's a weird combination of sounds. And the lyrics are mostly nonsense and just full of, like, this kind of old-timey swagger that's kind of dorky in a charming way. So looking into it, I find out this is a cover song of a Bruce Springsteen song that had come out just 3 years prior. So that's odd. Bruce Springsteen was a much bigger musician than Manfred Mann's Earth Band, whose biggest song is probably Blinded by the Light, their cover of one of his songs, and yet their version is the one that still gets radio play. The original is more of a straightforward rock song. You know, it's got that Bob Dylan-esque, I guess, kind of storytelling feel to it, where it's like a long, rambling story where the chorus comes in every once in a while. I mean, I don't listen to a lot of Bruce Springsteen, so I don't know how typical it is for his style, but, like, I've never heard of his version. This version is a sprawling 7-minute prog epic. It almost feels like a joke. It feels like they took the original and they thought that the chorus sounded so epic that, you know, like lyrically and in terms of its melody, that if they really put way more focus on the chorus, it would be a bigger song. So the chorus, when it comes in, is backed by just these stabbing 4-chord pianos. It's extremely ear-grabbing. Like, that makes sense why it was a big single when they put so much emphasis on it. But everything surrounding it is fucking insane. It's weird sounds and stuff, and it sounds kind of progressive. Again, not super technical, but enough to make me curious about listening to more. So I listened to the album. And track 2 on it is probably my least favorite. It's Singing the Dolphin In, mostly just because it's a slower song, and I mean, if you listen to a lot of, you know, older prog, you might not think it seems that out of place on a prog album, but, like, I was kind of hoping for things to get more proggy, you know, when I listened to the deep cuts. And then that's what happened immediately after track 2. But it didn't get proggy in the way I expected, because Manfred Mann's band has a background in jazz music. So jazz is very important to prog. There's a lot of, you know, crossover there, particularly the experimental jazz, because, you know, if you think of older jazz, more traditional jazz, it might be a band playing a set of songs, you know, that are themselves famous, as opposed to improvising and just showing off the raw skill of the performers, you know, in what would be considered free jazz. So or any other kind of experimental jazz. So like you get guys eventually at a point where like Miles Davis is doing this very experimental jazz with tons of improvisation. You've got jazz fusion, which combines just really technical improvisational solos and stuff with very tight songwriting, and has a more proggy sound, and also more of a rock sound than jazz, because it's usually incorporating more guitars, fewer of the like big band instruments. So like you've got this transformation happening that inevitably leads to prog rock, which is basically where people are just applying jazz principles, and particularly like jazz fusion principles, to just using rock instruments and not even bothering with jazz instruments, or maybe incorporating those in light ways into the music, which is kind of where Manfred Mann's falls in, because their music structurally is a combination of more structured songs and long passages of what is clearly jazz improv, where there might be, a consistent rhythm being played for a while one of the instruments is just going completely insane, or there's a duel between two instruments. They create lots of different soundscapes using different instruments, There's a lot of keyboard, but there's also a song that uses a full chorus, like a gospel-sounding chorus, to create a super unique atmosphere that when the solos are blazing over it, it sounds incredible. Again, the production on this album is like immaculate for 1976. So, but it's not as technical as any of like the big prog albums from this era. Like you're not going to hear any improv that's as crazy as what King Crimson was doing. You're not going to find on a song like Moonchild, like you're not going to find anything quite that out there. You're also not going to find like the crazy technical playing that you'd find on like a jazz fusion record like Return to Forever's Romantic Warrior, Like it's more toned down. It more is rock and roll. It has more breaks into those traditional rock structures, which makes it more similar, again, to prog, but it's still not even as much about like the tight song structures as something like Rush, where every note feels very practical. It's got more of that freeform jazz element. So I'd compare it more to like the Mars Volta or something. But the Mars Volta is also very comparable to a band like Yes, which combines a lot of these elements as well, and was like the biggest, influential prog rock band in the sense that most of what we call prog rock sounds like Yes. But again, even Yes is like a lot more deliberate, a lot less, improvisational than this album, and also like Yes or the Mars Volta, their albums are more conceptual, but Manfred Mann's did like primarily cover songs. Like all their albums have a bunch of cover songs, so they're combining doing covers with doing original songs that have lots of jam session parts and just jazzier freeform parts that aren't necessarily the most technical, but just hearing it paired up with that rock sound is really appealing. It's like a very different take on prog rock than any other prog I've personally heard. I mean, I'm sure there probably are other bands like them, but it's just really fascinating to hear, songs like Blinded by the Light, which again is just a light prog cover of a Bruce Springsteen song, that is somehow more famous than the Bruce Springsteen song. And the rest of the album it comes from is pretty solid as well. Again, Singing the Dolphin Through might be my least favorite, and it's track 2. So, I mean, I love Blinded by the Light, but, like, that doesn't get nearly as, like, technical as some of the other songs do. And, like, when they get into the solos are all really impressive, like, the guitar solos, the keyboard solos. There's one song where they're dueling each other, I think over the gospel chorus, with, again, the immaculate production. So it's like, when you hear all that together, you're like, fuck, this is legit, it's not the raw, like, orgasmic listening experience of listening to, like, a really incredible jazz fusion band. Snarky Puppy live show, like, live video or whatever, recorded in studio, will be crazier than listening to this. But this, again, has hooks, and it has guitar, at the forefront, and it can play on a boomer rock station every fucking day, But yeah, worth listening to for both the single and for the deep cuts. It's not like gonna break into my favorite albums list or anything. I'm just very fascinated by it, and it's not an album I've ever seen come up in conversation. I've never heard it talked about by prog fans. I've never seen it like acknowledged in that context. I'm sure again that it does have fans who are like that, and the videos have a ton of views on YouTube. Like, they have album uploads that have over 1 million views, so there's clearly a lasting love for the band. But yeah, I just think if you, like me, were into prog for a very long time and somehow never got directed to this album, I am directing you to it now. I think it's enjoyable.